Welcome to Yeshiva University. My name is Paul Glassman, and I'm Director of Scholarly and Cultural Resources here at YU. And I work with three vibrant libraries. First, the Pollack Library for General Studies on the lower level of this building, the Mendel Gottesman Library of Hebraica Judaica, this library in which we're sitting, and the Hagee Steinberg Library on the Barrington campus in Midtown. I also have the privilege of working with the Yeshiva University Museum, located at the Center for Jewish History in Chelsea. We're here today to celebrate, honor, and show appreciation for the remarkable donation by Ronald and Miriam Rubin of 350 newspaper issues published in North America between 1734 and 1869. Each of which tells us something important about the story of Jewish life on this continent. Since the earliest issue predates by over 4 decades the rebellion that resulted in the United States of America, the collection helps me remember, among other things, how long there has been a Jewish presence on this continent. In our era of news consumption on a variety of, dare I say, chaotic social media platforms, on websites, on blogs, and other self-published sources, we may forget how potent a communication channel the printed newspaper was until not long ago. As primary sources, they allow us to trace development over time and to examine issues in their original context. The newspaper is one of the few chronicles of an event in history or in our lives that we can hold in our hands. So, to Professor and Mrs. Rubin, thank you for sharing your scholarship, collecting expertise, and keen sense of the past with us. So now I'd like to introduce Curator of Special Collections and Hebraica Judaica, Shulamit Berger, who will introduce Dr. Dobrinsky. And Shuli's curatorial expertise includes an astonishing breadth and depth about the Jewish experience and material culture, which she shares with us through her engaging writing. Shuli has covered topics ranging from the Maxwell House Haggadah, to genealogical materials, to photographs, such as one taken on Tisha B'Av in 1926 at no less than the Arch of Titus in Rome. Shuli.
Thank you. Okay, I think I have a technical question. Okay, sorry about that. I think actually I've been voted to say a few words and then introduce Dr. Dobrinsky. So I'd like to welcome everyone to Yeshiva University and to the Mendel Gottesman Library and to Washington Heights. I think it's very appropriate that we have a collection of historic Americana here in Washington Heights, which was the scene of many Revolutionary War battles. And of course, I'd like to welcome Miriam and Ron Rubin. And it's always a beautiful day when Ron Rubin comes to visit, even on a day like today, when it's gray outside. And he's really not a guest, he's really a member of the family. He's always bringing gifts when he visits, and he's been a partner in building up the library's collections over quite a number of years. If you look in the library catalog, it features over 100 rare items which he has donated. An eclectic group ranging from a Biblia Rabbinica of 1619, otherwise known as Mikra Okadolot, works of Hebrew grammar, works in a myriad of languages, can go on. And of course, his major field of interest, and the reason we're here today, the topic we're going to discuss and celebrate, is a collection of rare Americana of Jewish interest. Paul actually spoke a little bit about the collection. So to recap, it's about 350 newspapers, all printed in the United States, even before the Revolutionary War. And it's essentially a survey of 135 years of Jewish history through the lens of the American press. You'll notice I did not say the American Jewish press because there wasn't really an American Jewish press at the time. And this is a collection which Professor Rubin has masterfully curated and selected. And each issue includes some gems, some articles, some item of interest about Jews and Judaism in the United States. And Paul also expressed this, for me, one of the highlights of the collection and an aspect of these primary sources, which I think will be very valuable for researchers and students, is the immediacy of the information. You're reading it the way a contemporary would have read it. And it places the Jewish material in the context of American life and society and other events of the time. Even the advertisements are illuminating. For example, in the Pennsylvania Journal, December 1781, Chaim Solomon has an ad. Chaim Solomon, broker. Of course, we all know of Chaim Solomon as one of the financiers of the Revolutionary War. Here he is in 1781. The war is still going on. The country is everything is in flux. It's, sort of a baby country. It doesn't even have a constitution yet. And Chaim Solomon is conducting his daily business. We learned that his office is on Front Street between Market and Art Streets in Philadelphia. He deals with bills of exchange and merchandise in France and other parts of Europe, presumably not in England since they were at war. And what to me was kind of a visceral moment was on the same page as Chaim Solomon's ad. There are ads for lost cows, there's a black and white cow, a red cow. There are ads for houses for sale, horses for sale, and there are ads for human beings for sale, right? To be sold. For want of employment, a strong, healthy, likely Negro wench, about 25 years of age, with her child, 3 years old. Both have had smallpox. She is good-tempered, handy about every kind of housework, and will suit for either town or country. Inquire of the printers. That's the end of the ad. And of course, we all know there was slavery in the United States, but this brought it home to me really as no textbook had ever done. And it's a reminder, this is a newspaper from Philadelphia, that even in the North, there was slavery. And in fact, in New York, slavery was abolished in 1828. So I think this type of thing says volumes to the reader about issues of power and status at the time. What did it mean to be a Jew in the United States in 1781? And what did it mean to be a Negro wench or her 3-year-old child in 1781? So there are a lot of things just from the context. And if people talk about digitizing newspapers, and if you looked up Chaim Solomon in a digital newspaper, you might just get the little ad about Chaim Solomon. You wouldn't necessarily get the rest of the page. And you wouldn't know about Judith Thomas, who's putting in an ad trying to reach her daughter and says, I'm in town and I'd like to see her. What kind of story is behind that ad? We don't know. We can speculate. You can see a selection from Professor Rubin's newspapers. There's a little exhibit area, and the handouts sort of match some of the exhibit area. And I think that Dr. Dobrinsky Vice President for University Affairs, and he's been an associate with Yeshiva University, I think, since you were in high school, which is also Professor Rubin's alma mater. So that's over 60 years. And he's worked with generations of people here at Yeshiva University. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Dr. Dobrinsky. It is my honor and privilege to do so.
Let me get through here, please. It is a great honor for me to have the zechus to offer some words of Torah in honor of the Rubins. They are incredibly devoted people to all the institutions with which they have an association, and Yeshiva University has been a very important part of their life for many, many years. In this week's Parsha, the Torah tells us how Yaakov continued to navigate the challenges of our forefathers in spreading God's name in the world. But Yaakov faced unique challenges and not only overcame them, but he even triumphed. He emerged from the difficult sojourn in Laban's home with a beautiful family and wealth. He struggled with Esau's guardian angel and emerged victorious. In recognition of these triumphs, the angel blesses him, and God follows up with giving Yaakov the name Yisrael. Ki sarisa im Elokim ve'im anashim batucha. For you grappled with divine humans and have prevailed. One interpretation is that Yaakov had two personalities. The Jewish people are called Am Yisrael and not Am Yaakov. The individual Yaakov was an actor in history and continues to have a story to tell as a father of the tribes and a man in the community. Therefore, the Torah continues to use his old name when telling that story. But Yisrael is the progenitor of a nation, and as such, he reaches out into the future to set the course of Am Yisrael, the transcendent nation. When Yaakov's story is about creating that future, the Torah refers to him as Yisrael. In this coming week's Parsha, the Torah tells the story of Yaakov mourning over the loss of his son. He knew that the future of the Jewish people was foretold with 12 tribes, and now one is lost. So he knows the future is lost. But when Yaakov hears that his son Joseph is still alive, suddenly the Torah switches and refers to him as Yisrael. This now is the man who now knows that the future of Am Yisrael is secure. We all live lives like Yaakov, people of the here and now, and also people who are building out a transcendent future. The Rubins, Ronald and Miriam, are respected and beloved members of our community who've done so much for Yeshiva University over a long span of time. and they are exemplary practitioners of our life in the present. And they are also shining examples of people who laid the groundwork for the future of our people as befits the name Yisrael. Their dedication to preserving the past and making it available to members of future generations is so beautifully on display here today. We are indebted to Ron and Miriam Rubin, who perpetuate our identity as Yisrael, and we wish them both continued Hatzlacha and Beracha ad 120 Shana. I want to acknowledge the partnership with my son-in-law, Rabbi Dr. Mike Kramer, in the preparation of this Dvar Torah.
Coming to the meat of the program, after my introductory remarks, you will be seeing on PowerPoint some representative issues from my collection. For me, this is something of a homecoming. In the mid-1950s, before many of you were born, I was a student at the high school here, and innumerable times I walked up the block on Amsterdam Avenue where the library is located. In that period, what stood on that site were World War II Quonset huts. Never would I have imagined that magnificent library structures such as this or a base medrash around the corner would have been erected. And we are indebted to Dr. Dobrinsky, probably the person who had more of a role in building the modern YU than any other figure. I want to thank the library staff here, Shuli Berger, the other colleagues in the corner, Mr. Paul Glassman, Rabbi Russ Schultes, previously of Hollywood, Florida, who is now a vice president of YU, and I'm grateful for all of you for coming. Some context. There were two cultural upheavals going on in the USA while in the period of time that my newspapers were collected. One was the general cultural question about how the new country should develop freedom, equality, what should be the purpose of the new republic. And at the same time, the group we're interested in, the Jews. The Jews were a very small minority. And the question was, how do they maintain their minority status while being loyal to their ancient religion in the midst of an alien Christian culture? Remember, even though this was a Christian culture, in terms of the amalgamation of the Jewish community, they had two big things going for them, which never took place in Europe. There was no established church to contend with, and there was no established monarchy. So that opened the door more for everyone being on his own. I call the book Strangers and Natives. And in that sense, we're going back to the Torah, Parshat Chayei, where Abraham goes up to the Bnei Chet, if you recall, in order to find a burial place for Sarah. And how does Abraham identify himself? Ger v'toshav anochi. I am a stranger and a resident or native in your midst. And if my collection or book has a theme, it is exactly that. How the Jews developed from being strangers to becoming acceptable and respected citizens. How that development took place in the eyes of the Jews, how they maintained their loyalty to the Yiddishkeit, and while developing the American enterprise, and how did the general public consider the Jews over time. There were very few Jews in the original colonies and pre-colonial era. And that makes it even more remarkable because the number of Jews was not any greater than the number of, let's say, Mohammedans. And yet, as I tried to show in my collection, there's an enormous interest in Jewish life. In fact, the people who founded this country thought that this country was a new promised land, was a new Zion. And we see this in the names of some of the cities: Bethlehem, New Hampshire, Salem, Massachusetts, and in the efforts to use Jewish symbols as part of the framework of the new country, the models of Yale University, the Urim V'Tumim, Columbia even has a replica of God's name on the floor of one of its buildings. So the Jews were very much looked up to. And that is an important part of the theme here. In fact, Benjamin Franklin, in the era pre-Constitution, about whether the Jews should or whether the country should follow federalism or anti-federalism, in order to support Franklin's arguments, he goes back to the Bible and he compares the anti-federalists to whom? Korach. Korach in his rebellion against Moses and Aaron. There was always a lot of interest in Jewish activities, Jewish life, in the papers that I've collected. There are stories about the holidays, about the Talmud, about Jewish weddings. A few of you saw an article in the other room about the Purim Ball, stories about the Jewish diet, stories about Maimonides. The papers indicate that the Jews were very much the other, but a respected other. In fact, for a period of history in this swath, in the 1840s, when the big emigration from Germany took place, and a lot of Jews were moving to the Western Prairie, there were not enough synagogues in town. So one of the papers, The Occident, an American Jewish Advocate, edited by probably the most important Jewish leader. They didn't use the word rabbi there much, by the way. Reverend Isaac Lisa in Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia. He began a newspaper which came out once a month, The Occident, an American Jewish Advocate. And for many Jews moving westward, this was their only source, their only contact with Judaism. One of the problems, however, was that a lot of the Jews moving in that direction were German immigrants, and they were more at home in German than in English. Even with the reverence or interest in Jews, I don't want to minimize, there was still a lot of anti-Semitic references in the various articles. There's material about Jewish graves being vandalized, about shady Jewish business practices. Jews always still had to contend with the missionary threat, so it wasn't such a sweet situation. But the point could be easily made that in the development of colonial and Republican America, Jews were very devoted to the American ideal. In fact, it's not in the display outside, but it's in the preface to my book, if you have the book. On the first anniversary of the signing of the Constitution in Philadelphia, July 4th, 1788, there's the largest parade to date which ever took place in America. There were 5,000 marches and something like 15,000 spectators. And one of the references in the Philadelphia packet in terms of the marches and the parade, who was there, it says, quote, "The clergy of the different Christian denominations with the rabbi of the Jews walking arm in arm." as an important expression of Jewish equality in that period. Reverend Satius, who I'll be talking about in the PowerPoint presentation, is the first clergyman to offer a Thanksgiving sermon in response to the request of George Washington. The first time that a rabbi opened a session of Congress is reported in the papers. The Jewish soldiers in the Civil War, on both sides. One of the other few references will be to the Civil War. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln was an important landmark. Lincoln was shot on April 14th. He lives till the following morning, April 15th. This was Halamot Hanukkah. So the first time that Jews were able to, the first Hanukkah on my mind. The first time that Jews were able to memorialize Lincoln was recorded in these newspapers. The newspapers show that these Jews, this 135 years, did not feel alienated, but they felt like important contributors to the American promise. And one of the main indications are the ads. In the early papers, which were 4 pages long, ads filled at least half the volume of the paper. So these ads show that Jews were involved in commerce and shipping and journalism, in developing the Western frontier, school administrators, booksellers. So this is the picture that we have of Jews. And what I tried to show in my book, before we look at the displays here, is that over this period of time, Jews emerged from being strangers to becoming natives. The Jews felt that they belonged here, and the non-Jews respected who these Jews represented. So let's take a quick look at the PowerPoint presentation. I tried to pick some representative papers, and I have 27 papers here. We're not going to spend too much time on each one, but I think, I hope it gives you a flavor of what was going on in Jewish American history in that period. And yes, all these PowerPoint things are also in the booklets which you may have gotten. Okay? I don't know what you're showing. I assume it's in the order that I gave. Yes. Okay. This is a reference to the first time the synagogue, an American synagogue, is mentioned in an American paper. It is in the issue of May 20th, 1734. Peter Zenga, John Peter Zenga, you may have heard of him, big person of freedom of the press, the New York Journal. And in an advertisement of a piece of land for sale, the paper says that the land is near the synagogue. Now I bought this at an auction, and I would scour a lot of these little things because the auction was selling Zenga's paper. That alone was worth enough. But something Jewish increases the value a good deal. So I bought the paper, and I'm very proud to have it. I claim that it's the first reference to a synagogue in North America, in the USA. And what about that synagogue? The Shearith Yisrael, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, then on Mill Street. It was 35 square feet, the dimension, and 22 feet high. And the people associated with developing that synagogue excluded any reference to something Jewish, such as a Magen David. This was because the Jews didn't want to be known or designated as such. And in a couple minutes, when I'm finished, you'll see where do I conclude. 2 newspapers in the 1860s which talk about the Jewish New Year. So you see, going from the Spanish and Portuguese, where there's no reference to anything Jewish, to papers in Alexandria, Virginia, and Charleston, South Carolina, talking about the upcoming Jewish New Year. So we come now, if I'm not mistaken, since I mentioned Shearith Israel, to, yes, I have 2 issues talking about the obituary of Reverend Gershom Mendes-Seixas. I should add that the title rabbi was not used then. It probably begins in the mid-1850s. And they were called Chazan, or they were called Reverend. And it was for good reason that these people, with respect to one of the Rosh Yeshiva while you're sitting there, these people were not greatly learned in the Jewish sources. But they were chazanim and they were counselors. And this was also the time before the cities in America had public schools. So each Beit Knesset operated a little school program. So what does it say about Reverend Seixas? Two tributes to him from these non-Jewish papers. His life was consecrated to learning, piety, and benevolence. He was an oracle of consultation to all sects and denominations. No minister, they called him a minister, no minister ever lived more respected, nor died more venerated. And he closed a long life in full confidence of the abiding mercy of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, since we're talking about Sherat Yisrael, I thought an interesting paper would be, I hope I'm coordinating with the camera, some of the members of these synagogues. There was one, Jacob Franks. It's in the New York Mercury, December 6, 1756. And what does he put an advertisement in for? He found some money in the street. So this civic-mindedness, he puts an ad in the paper to find the rightful owner. He'll give him back the money, he says, minus the cost of the advertisement. And from what I read, Jacob Franks, they called him rabbi at the time because he was learned. He participated in various Batei Din. And his wife, Bilhah Abigail, her letters to her son Naphtali in London, is considered the first book in the 18th century by a woman in New York. So let's continue with the New York synagogues. We're talking here about a synagogue dedication, May 14th, 1853. Then the Jewish population of the city was about 20,000 and a half million non-Jews. It's the Crosby Street Synagogue. Crosby Street is on the Lower East Side. And it says this is the 13th synagogue already in New York City. Two of these synagogues belong to the German Israelites. That's another interesting point. Over the years, the Jews were not called, they were either called Israelites or Hebrews. I don't know exactly when the term Jew comes up, but that's an interesting comparison. And what does it say about the dedication ceremonies? The prayers were chanted with people with a knowledge of music, quote, which art is more cultivated among the Jews than among any other race in the world. Okay, we come now to another example of Jewish worship. And this refers to the Aseret Shemei Tshuva, September 26, 1844. Renewal of religion among the Jews. And it mentions that the Jews are going to Slicha services. The faithful congregate at 4 o'clock. Few of our Christian sects exceed in their devotion and the norms of, and give up the norms of sleep to mingle in spiritual endeavors. So you already had from people who get up 4 in the morning to go to shul and slippers. A little note of the next paper, the Daily Delta of New Orleans. What's interesting there is that in one of the ads by Mr. Regensberger, if you notice the Hebrew, am I correct? It says matzot on the top of the ad. All right, we come now to a paper on November 19th, 1856. a very admiring article about the Jews. It says, and I don't want to go through the whole thing, at the present moment, Jews stand out at the head of nearly every walk of life throughout Europe. In Germany, at least half a dozen of the most distinguished professors are Jewish. In Paris, there's the actress Rachel. In fact, no matter what they turn their heads to, philosophy or fine arts, money changing or old clothes, they uniformly push their occupation that extends beyond all competitors. All right, we come now to the New York Herald. Here, by the mid-1800s, there are Jews coming from various countries in Europe, and calls start for some sort of unified Jewish umbrella organization. That's what this article deals with. And just one little quote. The fact is that there are Jews not only from Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, and German Jews, but there is actual jealousy and even antipathy between them. So the fact that you had so many lands of origin makes it more important to organize. Now, I've been discussing serious stuff. We come now to the Purim Ball. When we were inside on the exhibits, a number of you noticed, it's on page 40 on the New York Times, March 23rd, 1864. It's on the front page. Our Jewish citizens in their glory. And it's a masquerade ball, and it talks about how some of the people are dressed, Joan of Arc, Lucretia Borgia, the Duke of Ellington, and it talks, if you don't mind my saying, about flirtations going on at the ball. And what made this what made this ball acceptable, this is 1864, in the middle of the Civil War. The money would go to the Orphans Asylum, so it wasn't just all frivolity. Now we come to the crown jewel of my collection, or any collection of antiquarian papers such as these. September 15, 1790. This is the issue that talks about George Washington, the interchange of correspondence between George Washington and the Newport Hebrew congregation. You notice it's Hebrew, not Jewish congregation. And what makes this article so valuable is that it's also an important expression of American Jewish, American liberal feelings. Talks to bigotry, no sanction, to persecution, no assistance. And I don't want to read you the excerpt from the letter, but the language, it's in the handout, the language is very quasi-biblical. Talks about the seed of Abraham, people living under their fig trees. Incidentally, this was a busy day for Washington. He comes to Newport August 17th, and he stays to the 18th. In my book, I have another exchange he had with Newport residents. Washington was a Mason. That was a fraternal organization. He was even inaugurated using a Mason Bible. And there was the King David Lodge. There was even a Masonic Lodge in Newport. And the president of the Masonic Lodge is the same person who's the warden, i.e. the president of the Newport Hebrew congregation, Moses Seixas. This Moses Seixas was a brother of Gershom Mendes Seixas of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. So Washington has a connection with Jews. In his second visit to Newport, he stays over Seixas' home. Seixas, from what I read, you would call a frum man. He was a Moel, a Balkore. So Washington knew Jews. It just wasn't an idea of extending freedom of religion to all groups. We come to another dimension of the Jewish experience. The Niles Weekly Register, December 14th, 1816. And this is dealing with the conversion issue. It was a big issue for Jews all through the 1800s, early 1700s. There were all sorts of efforts. These missionary societies would not leave Jews alone. But one reaction here in the article you see there, it said there were 5 Jews converted last year, and it cost this organization $500,000 to save 5 Jewish wayward souls. So it asked at the end, whether Jews convert to Christians or Christians convert to Jews. What is it to us in a land of civil and religious liberty? In other words, don't get so worked up over that type of thing. All right, we come now, as Shuli Berger indicated, to references to Jewish merchants. So on page 92 of the booklet, October 11, 1782, we see one ad after another, various Jewish merchants. Note Jonas Phillips, Nonis and Cohen. Just shows how prominent Jews were in the commercial aspect of the times there. Now, Jonas Phillips is an interesting figure. He was a frum Jew, and he was born in Germany, and he becomes a freeman of the state of New York. He signed the non-importation agreement in 1770. If you know your history, you know the colonists didn't want to give England money by importing things. He moves to Philadelphia. After the British captured New York, a lot of the important personages in Sheretz Yisrael moved to Philadelphia, including Reverend Seixas. Phillips enlists in the Continental Army, and he's the person from Mikveh Israel who sends a letter to George Washington inviting him to be at the Mikveh Israel's dedication of its new building. Page 90, the next one, Chaim Solomon. I hope I'm keeping it in sequence here. December 24th, 1784. One of the interesting things about Solomon's biography, he died at age 45. He first comes to America in 1932, and he's here 13 years, and he becomes a wealthy man. He must have been a very capable businessman. He's a banker, he's a broker, and he was captured by the British twice during the Revolutionary War. He gave the U.S. government $200,000 during the Revolution, which was a fortune at the time. And he even gave money to political leaders, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, independently. And he paid for 1/4 of the construction of the new building of Mikveh Yisrael. Now for some humor or diversion, we have our next reference to Jacob Morse. Who was Jacob Morse? What's interesting, why I included here is because he was a macha in Mikveh Israel, and he was a president, in fact. And yet, what does the ad say? What is he trying to sell? Christmas ornaments. So he had no hesitation of selling these ornaments, and it was like a luxury tchotchke store. And this was an ad in 1820. We come to the next reference, if I'm in sequence, Niles Register, November 28, 1829. And there's a rumor that the Rothschilds purchased Jerusalem. So that's for humor too. Said the Sultan needed money, the Rothschilds had a lot of money. Okay, we come to the next reference. Someone spoke about slave ownership earlier. Isaac Franks. Isaac Franks was one of the 100 Jewish soldiers in the Revolutionary War. He was jailed by the British. He becomes a businessman later after the war in Philadelphia. And he has an ad to sell a slave. And he says the slave is honest, the male slave is honest and sober. This Isaac Franks also knew George Washington. In 1793, when Washington visits Philadelphia, he He stays with Isaac Franks in his suburban home in Germantown. The next one is a vicious ad about Jews, a vicious reference to Jews. Remember, even though the Jews, as I mentioned, are becoming more and more integrated in America, you still have a lot of examples of published anti-Semitism. And this article is called Jewing. What does Jewing mean? To handle or to squeeze a customer if you can, and to mislead him, to deceive him. So it talks June 6, 1835, the New York Sun, which was the most conservative paper in New York City, where Jewish tradesmen come to this town and they bring porcelainware, which probably isn't very expensive, to buy old clothing. And it's to make fun of the Jewish Yiddish accent. They said, D-women, D-men, dead men, dead women. So that's Jewing. The next one is a beautiful article dealing with Benjamin Nomis. I should have brought my book up here. Could I just read something to you? It's a beautiful, touching attack on anti-Semitism.
Ronnie,
Come on.
here's the page.
You got it there?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Notice was an immigrant from France. He fights in the Revolutionary War. And in a newspaper, it attacks him. Previously, it attacked a black, and then Notice answers back. I'm reading in the second column. I am a Jew. I glory in belonging to that persuasion which even its opponents, whether Christian or Mohammed, allowed to be of divine origin. But I am a Jew. I am so, and so are Abraham and Isaac and Moses and the prophets, and so too are Christ and the apostles. Then he continues, I am a Republican. Thank God I have not been so heedless and so ignorant, so proud or so prejudiced to renounce the cause for which I have fought as an American more than my religious principles. At the end, I am a Jew, and for no other reason I am a Republican. Why? In republics we have rights. In monarchies we have but to experience wrongs. That's a rather eloquent testimony.
Today.
Maybe another 10 quick references later. We're coming now to the Civil War. There were 150,000 Americans in the country living here during the Civil War. Most were in the North, but you had a considerable amount in the Confederacy. There were 3,000 Jewish troops actually who fought in the Confederacy. I have an upcoming reference to that point. And we talk here about Rabbi Morris Raphael, originally from England. He's the founding rabbi of the upscale congregation, B'nai Jeshurun, which still functions today. And he made a speech when what was called the Day of Fasting by President then James Buchanan. And he defends slavery. What slavery? He's defended the slavery of the Bible. He said in the Bible, the slave, and as you know, if you have an Eved Kanani, you have to treat him very well. And he said that in the Torah, the word Eved doesn't mean slave really, but it means a servant. It's a higher form of subjugation. It's not as denigrating as the word slave. And this set off a big storm in New York City and the rest of the country. For 3 weeks, there are articles going back and forth in the newspapers about Rabbi Raphael's sermon. And I mentioned there the reference, there's a writer, Helgren, who's Jewish, considered learned, and he talks about the sacrilegious words of the rabbi. If Rabbi Raphael wants the Bible to be regarded as divine, he should teach it as, quote, pure, just, and humane, Otherwise, this author said, the Bible would be an object of human frailty. Similarly, relating to the Civil War, on September 4th, 1862, in the Patriot Union in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, there's an article about how Jews were anxious to sign up in Chicago. They raised $10,000 to recruit Jewish troops for the war, company of Jews, and each Jewish signatory was to receive $100 in order to enlist. The next article is one of the most touching in my collection. The Daily Dispatch of Richmond, Virginia, October 22nd, 1864. It deals with the funeral of Madison Marcus, I believe Major Madison Marcus. And there's a picture there, which I think came through in your handout. The only Jewish military cemetery outside of Israel is in Richmond, Virginia, at the Jews Cemetery. There are 50 Jews buried there, casualties of the Civil War. And could I just read you this one? What it says about Marcus. Captain Marcus was a young man between 25 and 30. He was an Israelite, and although a number of his people who were in the army were granted leave of absence to attend upon the Feast of Atonement, Yom Kippur, to go home for leave in Yom Kippur, which is a time of release for all labor. The Feast of Tabernacles closely following, yet he asked no leave, considering that in performing his duty to his country, he would worship his God in an acceptable manner. He didn't want to get off for Yom Kippur, and he got killed in the process. And a few more references, then we'll finish. We come down to Ulysses Grant. Ulysses Grant issued what's called Order Number 11. Grant was in charge of the territories in what became 3 states, Kentucky, Tennessee, and I think Missouri. And what was happening was that he orders that all Jews in his bailiwick must leave town with a 24-hour notice. He accuses them of dealing in the black market, buying cotton, selling it up north, and this caused a big outrage. He expelled all Jews from his area, and the Jews up there got very rightfully perturbed. They run to Washington, they signed St. Louis, they signed petitions, 2,000 Jews signed a petition, and that article deals with Lincoln rescinding the order. There were Christian congressmen who also confronted Lincoln about that. There were Union veterans who had to be expelled from Paducah, Kentucky. So that, what's interesting in the book, in New York City, Grant runs and is elected president. They've developed, I don't recall which page it is, a political clubhouse. It's considered the first Jewish political clubhouse in American history. And the idea was Jews in New York City defending Grant. He really didn't mean what he ordered. It was done by a subordinate. All right, now we come to Lincoln's death. I think I mentioned at the beginning, Lincoln was shot on Colombo Pesach, and he had a big following among Jews even then. He knew his Bible, he knew Tehillim. And this issue, April 20th, 1865, a blackboarded issue, it deals with the services of 7 New York City synagogues in honor of Lincoln. And there's a special section on that page which talks about not only the services as such, but the decorations of the synagogue. So you see the Jew is becoming more and more embedded in American culture. We come now, three more references. This was, the mid-1800s was also a period of missionary activity among Jews and Christians discovering the Holy Land. They go to the Holy Land. Mark Twain went to the Holy Land. Grant goes to the Holy Land. And this is an article about Rachel Stewart. It says, one of the few places where tradition has not erred. And Muslim graves surround her tomb because they consider her holy. They respected her domestic virtues. She was a decent wife, an excellent mother, as well as the parent of a mighty people. My last two references summarize my theme that we went in American history from strangers to natives. So what did I begin by talking about? That in the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, they purposely avoided any exterior decorations, such as a Magen David. They didn't want to broadcast that this is a Jewish house of worship. And yet we have two references from the Alexandria Gazette, September 21st, 1865, and the Charleston Daily Courier, 1869, talking about the upcoming Jewish New Year. Yesterday was the beginning of this Jewish New Year, or the anniversary of creation. The number of the Hebrew population, the members of the Hebrew population in this place, and the extent of their business were plainly perceptible today by the numerous stores, shops, and places of business closed on King Street and in other parts of the city. And finally, the Charleston Daily Courier. The New Year also commends the 10 days of penitence, the lot of which is called the last of which is called Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, of which we will give some address and account in the future. And it says, even lukewarm Israelites always unite with their brethren and show up in synagogue on the Day of Atonement. So I hope you enjoyed this brief newspaper history. It was a great pleasure. Although Miriam says now she got more room in the house after I donated the material. Why you? How did I get interested and involved in all this? Even when I was always interested in newspapers. Even here, I wrote a few articles. I don't know if it's still called that, the Academy News. When I went to college at NYU, I was editor-in-chief of the daily newspaper. This is a big zhus, because what made this paper distinctive, it was the smallest college daily in America. Putting out a newspaper every day, particularly when you're not writing national or international news, is very trying. I spent my 2 last years of college primarily on the paper instead of class. And finally, my PhD dissertation dealt with American foreign propaganda. So I was always interested in newspapers. I identify myself strongly as a Jew. I believe in the American destiny. So this collection combines those two interests and my newspaper background. I appreciate you giving me the time.
Any questions?
Oh yeah, any questions? Anyone want to buy some secondhand newspapers?
Where did you find them?
Yeah, where did I find it? First of all, I knew my history. I knew what to look for. Again, I don't want to compliment myself, but Stamazar, you wouldn't be able to locate these papers. So there are newspaper dealers, antiquarian dealers. One of them was supposed to come, the major one was supposed to come here today, the one I made a rich man. And then there are auctions. The main auction houses, when they have an Americana auction, usually have some newspapers in it. And then there's eBay that I picked up a few things. I did a little trading also. I'm I'm very pleased that I had this opportunity to spend all the hours that I did in collecting these papers. It made me more aware of my Yiddishkeit, and also what unfortunately today is under a lot of assault, the American enterprise. Any other questions?
Who was the first ordained or Muslim rabbi in America? What came from Europe, and who was the first ordained rabbi?
Seixas was considered the first minister. He, they didn't call, as I said, rabbis, but he studied a little. I don't think he was very learned. Another interesting thing about Seixas, he was one of the 14 people who spoke at Washington's inauguration, and he was a regent of King's College, later to be known as Columbia College. But the first so-called Rav is Rabbi Rice, who comes to, in the mid-1800s, I think, to Baltimore.
Is there any truth to President Abraham Lincoln being Jewish because he was shot in the temple?
No, he was shot in the theater.
Not because his name was Abraham.
John Wilkes Booth can shoot him and shul. I didn't get your jokes. Any other? I know, I got it. Yes, Eitan. This is one of my grandsons, Eitan.
In a Bragg article, why was it published in 1868? Why not 1862 when it was like the Bragg disorder?
Which article? Oh, the 1862 was the date of the order.
Yeah, so why did they publish it then? Why did they publish it in
68 deals with, Grant was running for president in 68. If you read the rest of the paragraph, they said, how could anyone vote for Grant because of his, issuing that Jewish exclusion order? All right, thanks for hearing me.